And welcome to our fireside chat this afternoon. We'll tell you a little bit about it in a moment. My name is Mike Pakovich. I'm the Interim Director of Health Programs here at Yale-China, and I'll be getting things moving, but turning it over pretty quickly. Just want to bring you up to date. This is our second to last fireside chat of the 2014-15 academic year. There's one more coming up, and that will be on May 12th from 4 to 5:30. And that's Professor Changsha Huang, the Vice President of the Shanghai Theater Academy, who will be talking about theater-related subjects. So if you're interested, or if you have friends who would be interested in that talk, pass the word around. You'll get an email from us at some point in the near future with that information, and you can forward that on. But this morning this afternoon, I thought I'd start out by asking the question, what did you have for dinner last night? How many people remember what you had right now, what you had for dinner last night? I thought about that, and I thought, it took me a minute. What did? Oh, yeah, right, okay, the casserole, okay. You know, that's last night. I don't know about you, but sometimes it's a little hard to keep track of. When I really stretch, you know, I can go back as far as about 1968.
What you had for dinner?
Not what I had for dinner. I sat on my father's lap driving his car down Route 80 in North Branford. Some of you might know that road. And as a little kid, I was going like this with the steering wheel, and my father suddenly grabbed it away from me and yelled, and I was traumatized. I think I'm still dealing with it today. But this afternoon, we have a friend with us who goes back quite a bit further than that. So I want to play you something that'll give us a little bit of a flavor of who Maude Pettus is. And I first want to introduce Professor Ann Williams. She's been 20-year board member of Yale-China, something like that. Great friend of the organization. And she's going to be our sort of Barbara Walters for the afternoon. So, to start out, to give you a little bit of a taste before Maude gets going herself, let me just play a short clip. And Maude went to China in 1940, and when her husband came and asked her, there was a little drama and history behind that.
Remembered his former exchange, and mine was China. Oh, I wanted to go to China since I was 4 years old.
Okay, and without further ado, I'll turn it over to Ann Williams and Maude Pettus.
Thank you all for coming. It's really great to see you all. I have some questions that I'm going to ask Maude, and I know she has lots of answers for me. But before we start, I just want to say a few words about our Yale-China's really inexpressible debt to Mrs. Pettus, to you. Maude, you represent all of the extraordinary people who came before us here at Yale-China. All of the people who took on the extraordinary task of traveling to China, traveling to Changsha. It's really halfway around the world from here. She took that trip well over 50 years ago. to join hands with friends in Changsha, to work together with friends in Changsha, American and Chinese doctors and nurses, to build a hospital that today is, I don't know, 4 or 5 hospitals with thousands of thousands of patients, and it just is extraordinary. Mrs. Pettus, Maude, went to Changsha really in the midst of the Second World War. From the Chinese perspective, the war had started. It hadn't started here, but it had there. She lived through that incredible time, that tumultuous time in Changsha. Changsha itself passed back and forth between the Chinese and the Japanese several times while she was living there. She gave birth to her first child, Anne, who's here with us today also, in Changsha, at the end of a long working day, after working all day as a nurse, and her husband working all day as a surgeon, and then it was 5 o'clock, well, let's have this baby, in a halfway demolished hospital in the midst of a war. I mean, this is very impressive and serious stuff. Maude played many roles in Changsha and also elsewhere as she traveled in China as the war raged on around them. Eventually, Maude lost her husband in a small plane crash. It was a terrible thing for her as he sought to bring a plane back to Changsha. And she went on to live a very productive life, working as a nurse and raising 2 amazing daughters, one of which we have with us today. She never remarried, and she never forgot China. I think the most amazing thing to me is the first time I met Mrs. Pettus, and the second time I met Mrs. Pettus, they were both in Changsha, not in New Haven. There she was, and one of them was like last year. And I'm tired, it's a long trip, and then it was gone, like ready to go. So I just think it's extraordinarily important. And we are extraordinarily honored here at Yale-China to have both Maude and Anne with us. And I believe that Maude's name is Pamela. And Anne's name also, I wrote it down, but maybe Anne remembers if I don't. No, Anne is Pamela, that's right. Yeah. Pamela. And Maude is?
Pamela.
Pamela. So thank you so much. And thank you, both of you, for your extraordinary history and for bringing this piece of Changsha and of Americans in Changsha and of the American-Chinese friendship to us. We are very blessed to have you with us. So now we have some questions, and we'll see.
You asking me questions?
I'm going to ask you some questions, and we'll see where it takes us. So the first question I have for you, Mrs. Pettus, is that you apparently, this is just amazing to me, you have been interested in China since you were a very small child in rural West Virginia, almost 100 years ago. Really, 100 years ago. So, what brought China to your mind? What were you thinking of? Can you remember? What were you thinking of when you were so small and you were thinking about China?
I must have learned about China from visiting a mission band, which I was belonged to in the church I belonged to. They had a children's band called Mission Band, and we had stories about the mission that the church was taking part in. And so I must have just tuned in to China right away, because I always did feel close, very, very close to China. I thought was a magical heaven.
It's just amazing.
Just a wonderful place.
And so, you had this idea of a magical place when you were 4 years old,
Yeah, and I wanted to go there.
and you wanted to go there. And then you grew up, and you studied nursing, very hard time to study nursing, in Washington, D.C. And then you met this young man. And what did he tell you about China? How did you meet him?
Oh,
Tell us about it.
when I met my husband, we didn't talk about China. He went to an American high school in China, Beijing. It was called Peking sometimes and Beijing and other times, but at this particular time it was Beijing. And now it is Beijing again. And I visited there last year.
But when you met Win, you met him in Washington. He was a student, actually, young student, and you were studying for your RN exams, which, as we know, I'm a nurse too, it's a big deal.
Point in life.
It's a very important part of life, yes it is, and we have a lot of nurses here, actually. We all went through this together. But it sounds like it was a wonderful whirlwind romance with Win. Tell us a little bit about your wedding, because that happened fairly soon. Your wedding to Win. Tell us a little bit about that. I think you married him here in New Haven.
Well, he was graduating from Yale Medical School. That meant his 8th year in New Haven. And I had known him during a lot of that time, so I knew all the Yale songs and the Hoofer paper. And what was the question?
Well, we were talking about the wedding, because I remember Win graduated.
He graduated
in the morning.
At noon, at 11 o'clock
11 o'clock.
from medical school. And at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we were married.
Wasting no time.
No time at all. Because we had already planned everything ahead of time,
Right.
so that we knew we'd get there on time. You hate to be late for your wedding.
Or your graduation. It seems like it was all going on in the
Oh, well,
same
the
day.
graduation was morning.
Yeah.
That was a different, in those days, an afternoon was very different from a morning.
Uh-huh.
Everything like graduation from any school would be at 11 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
But marrying Maude Pettus Miller, that was my maiden name, Maude Miller, M-I-L-L-E-R, was different. So
That was a good afternoon, an afternoon wedding
at
ceremony.
4 o'clock in the afternoon was the wedding.
And were your parents there?
My father married me.
Wow.
He was a Mennonite minister.
Mhm.
And we had a big celebration, of course, because we had, everybody was there for the graduation from his medical school, and then for my wedding in the afternoon. And we had a party.
A big party, yeah, Yeah, what a wonderful way to start.
Yes, and we went to the church and downstairs, graduation line for the wedding. So it worked very well, close together.
Right, right. And then you took a long, long honeymoon.
Well, it turned out to be a long because that was the way it should be. And I guess if you were still living, it would be still a honeymoon.
Great, great. But you went east from New Haven. You went to San Francisco, right? And then to China.
Of course. China was always my aim. But I didn't know it. I didn't know it.
You know, and so you met Wynn's parents for the first time
In the capital of China, and I thought, wow, that's like Washington D.C.
Yeah, yeah. So what was that visit like? What was
Well,
Dad Pettus like?
It was scary. I was a little bit
Sure.
ill at ease.
Well, I don't blame you. I would have been too. This is a big conjunction.
It's
This
a
is a
big
little
conjunction.
girl
And
from
they
West
were-
Virginia, and
They lived in the capital of a big nation
right.
that I had always thought very much of. Now, what did you ask about the?
Well, I wondered what you did when you were in Beijing
Oh.
with them.
I had a father-in-law
Yes, tell us about him.
who believed that everybody that worked or were associated with people in another country should learn the language. So he already had started a Chinese language school. So I had to go to school every morning, first thing, right after breakfast.
Wow.
My husband, being a doctor, got to go to the hospital to observe what was going on. And I was to go to the language school and learn what I could. And the teacher got up and said, "Joshua B." He didn't speak a word of English, but we were to learn that this is a pen. And Joshua, this is. So Joshua B was the first language lesson I had, and I learned what a pen was.
Very useful. And you still know it today.
I still know it today.
Still know it
It's
today.
a B, and I have the right tone. B.
Good job. Good job. So after your time in Beijing with Wynn's parents, your time traveling, continuing east until it became west, and you ended up back in New York. And then you worked in New York for 2 years, right?
Yes,
Right.
because I was married in the meantime, and
Right.
my husband was having his internship 1 year and residency this second year.
Right.
So in New York, I worked in the Presbyterian New York Hospital, which is still a very good place to be.
Right.
And an interesting thing happened during my time in New York was that Madame Chiang Kai-shek was ill. And she was in the nicest hospital there is in New York City, or you might say in America. and I was sick at the same time. So I was in the same hospital with Madame Gautachek, and at the same time. So I met her.
And you sought her out, right? You decided to go meet her.
Yes. Brave.
You were always very brave. Nothing held you back.
But that didn't surprise me because she was such an outstanding person and I was such a little person. But I wanted her to know that we were in the same hospital together.
And what did she say?
Oh, I don't remember. But she was gracious.
Yes.
And she was very humble. She was, I thought she was an outstanding person. I didn't keep in touch.
Right.
Because I knew she would visit.
Well, you also, while you were in New York, went to hear Pearl Buck speak.
Oh, yes. That was quite a... Because my impression of China was Pearl Buck's book. And although it was all wrong, because China was so much different than the book was. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't, the things that were put in the book did happen. But you don't write something about a country and make it all bad. The worst part, you put in a book. Shucks, that gives the wrong impression. It's just like thinking America was just like Tobacco Road. And if you gave that impression, you would have the wrong knowledge of America.
Right, right.
So I didn't like the book.
But you went to hear her speak.
Of course, well, she was a famous woman. I wanted to meet her. And
did you tell her you had already met Mrs. Chiang Kai-shek?
It took my bravery to have the nerve, after listening to her speech, which was very good, but I don't remember things she said, to go up and introduce myself as I'm just an ordinary person. And here she was, humble and very nice. She had given a good speech and I said so. And I thought to be able to meet Pearl Buck was such an honor. And it was so great to think that I got to meet her. And I told her she gave a good speech.
Well, it seems to me that even though you and Win didn't talk about China, your life had many Chinese themes in it as you went along. And even in New York, meeting Mrs. Chiang Kai-shek, meeting Pearl Buck. And then tell us about how you decided to go to China. How did the idea of you and Win going to China, how did this come up?
Well, Win was a doctor in Presbyterian Hospital, and he ate meals with the doctors. I was even invited once in a while. And but I could invite him to my dining room also, which I did, because that was a great treat from my colleagues to have Dr. Pettus as a dinner guest. So I did every so often.
But now, how did the idea of going to China, when did Win bring this up to you?
Well, he ate in the doctor's dining room. They had better feed than the nurse's dining room. But I could be invited. was always, you know, doctors, when you're at meals, you always give them the news and whatever is going on. And he heard them say that Yale-China was desperately looking for a surgeon to work in a hospital in Changsha. Well, Win came home. Win thought about it. He thought, he had always said that he didn't want to be a doctor in China. But here was an American hospital that wanted an American doctor, surgeon, desperately. And nobody seemed to want to accept. So he came home and said, how would you like to go to China? I said, China?
What made you think of China?
I wanted to go to China since I was 4 years old. I don't know why I said that, because I don't think it was quite right. Anyway, that's how I had a chance. And he was so pleased because earlier in his love life, he had a girlfriend who was turned out to be Christian Science and became ill and didn't seek medical care. And she had refused to go to China with him for just a vacation trip. So he was a little suspicious. He wanted to be careful. How would you like to go to China? You know, that was just a funny way to approach a question of that kind. And I burst in joy. I said, China? I've wanted to go to China since I was 4 years old. I don't know why I said that either, but I do remember it was all there. So that's how I got to go to China.
Well, it sounds to me as if your soul is partly Chinese. So I think you felt that calling to be home.
Good.
But I know that the trip to go to China in 1940 was extraordinarily difficult. This was not a vacation trip.
No.
Tell us a little bit about what your first impressions were when you got to Changsha, or even when you got to China. What was the boat trip like?
Well, I love to travel. And I thought it was a pretty nice place.
China.
I did find some streets that I didn't like at all. I mean, they weren't up to America's cleanliness. And I always reacted to odors that weren't as pleasing as the nice flowers that we have in America.
But basically you liked China when you got there.
Oh, of course. I mean, when I went there, I went to somebody's house. My in-laws in Beijing,
Right.
which was the capital of China. So I had a very nice introduction to China, and of course, you don't always know why you like something, but it feels right.
It speaks to you.
It speaks to me.
It speaks to you.
And China spoke to me, of course. I wanted it to.
And I know what you found in Changsha was certainly much different than Beijing. But I also know that almost immediately when you arrived, you began to work.
Yes, sure.
Because you got there and
The hospital was there, needing a nurse,
so you plunged in.
of course.
And could you tell the patients that this is a pen? What else did you have to tell them?
I didn't tell them this is just a read.
Was the language an issue?
I had a tutor, a Chinese teacher. That was his job, to teach Chinese. And I had him 1 hour every day. And so if I go in my office and want to say something and didn't know how to say it in Chinese, I would put that down on paper and take it to my teacher and learn it. I learned a great deal of mixed up Chinese. I mean, it had a lot of medical terms in it, but it had a lot of getting along. How do you do this? You know, was a term that I had to learn right away. And once you learn that, they give you an answer in Chinese, which you don't know. So then you have to try to figure it out. That's your next step. But you use a lot of sign language. But I did have a teacher, an hour a day.
Well, that must have been helpful.
And I knew what I wanted to learn. The words, I mean, I had a lot of medical language. And quite a bit of the medical stuff was new to the Chinese, and their interpretation of it was almost like, well, the word for modern was modern. So I thought, well, I could learn that, you know. And I was modern.
I know that you also traveled when you were in China.
Sure.
And you traveled to Guiyang to help with when the medical college was moved there during the war.
Well, I traveled to Beijing because my husband went with the medical school, which was moved there.
Right.
And he was a professor.
Right.
So I lived with my husband
Right.
in Beijing.
And one of the things I remember hearing, you got a shipment from the British Red Cross of very fancy hats and clothes.
Oh, it was a shipment of British high-price people wanting to get rid of some of their, wanting to be a big donation.
Mm-hmm.
And the baggage that came was ridiculous. There wasn't a thing on it that the ordinary Chinese would want to have. So I said, what can you do? How can we turn this into cloth making material? Have a tag sale. So we had a big sale.
Mm-hmm.
To my surprise, it was the biggest success that you could have. I don't know why, but people bought all this stuff that was given from the British. Fancy hats, scarves, dresses, anything. Nothing that was of any use to the ordinary Chinese to help a person put on something and go to work. that's what I wanted. So I thought, okay, how can I turn this no good material, which were very nice, into money?
I didn't know these are business cards from John Lay's.
Have a sale. It wasn't a tag sale, it was a big community sale. And it was successful, very successful. I was shocked.
And then with the money,
And with the money, I was shocked that we got so much money for that junk. I mean, it wasn't junk. It was nice stuff, but it was no use to the ordinary Chinese who was going to work every day.
so then you took
So
the money.
I used the money to buy cloth. And we had tons of, well, we can call them uniform, because the working cloth was strong cloth. And it was a jacket and trousers. So we turned the money into buying cloth. We got yards and yards of these great big bowls of cloth and made Chinese working style clothes. And that was successful too. I was just lucky.
Sounds like it was a good plan. So when you got back to Changsha after that trip in 1941, in August, the war had made things much worse. Conditions were much worse. And in September, there were serious attacks on Changsha by the Japanese.
Military.
The military, that's right, by the military. Tell us about what you did to show the Chinese nurses how to protect themselves and what you did in the hospital.
Well, my concern was the nurses, because we had a school for nursing, and there were 100-some students. We had a unoccupied floor of the hospital, 3rd floor. And I decided that a good place to protect the nurses was to have them live there. And we made beds and arranged it so it was livable. But the floor was full of windows, and they were on more or less easy for the street to shoot through the windows. And it was a dangerous place to have the girls stay. But it was a good place because there was nothing there, and we could fill it with beds or whatever was needed. And the thing I had to tell them was never to have your head at the level of the windows, because the windows were very accessible to street fighting. And they could, when they're fighting in the street, they could just turn around and go upstairs. And they had a hard time remembering not to stand up. I mean, I can understand how hard it was, really, to think that you can't walk through a great big empty floor and not use it. So I had to say, this time you have to stay down. Now there are 2 or 3 ways to stay down, and the one is just to stoop, but that gets awful tired. And the best way proved to be crawl. And the floor was even and not rough, so it wasn't. That was the easiest way to stay down, to go from entering the room to floor level. Now that's hard for young nurses to sit. They had to crawl. They crawled when they were babies. That was past long ago. But I taught them by practice. It was very easy for me. I just called, kneeled down and called from one bed to another. And they were very cooperative, and nobody was ever hurt.
Well, it sounds like it was a really, really challenging and difficult time. It's hard for me to even imagine being in that situation. And tell us about the time when a Japanese officer came to the hospital and wanted to look around. And
This was a Japanese soldier that was a doctor, and he announced himself at the gate. We had a gateman, and they rushed in to my office and said, "There's a soldier out here that says he's a doctor and wants to see the operating room." And I felt real quick. Lots of thoughts went through that he wants to use it for his soldiers. Well, I wanted soldiers to be taken care of too, but I didn't want to be taken care of on our property with our instruments. So I said, send him in. And he came in with his bayonets and everything right over his shoulder. And I didn't find it easy to talk to a soldier like that, although he said he was a doctor. And I didn't know and thought physically of the fact that a doctor is always sympathetic and what's the word I want?
well, cares about people.
Compassion.
Compassion, maybe.
Compassionate. Compassionate. And so we'll try. I said, send him in. So he came in, and of course, my approach has always been social. And I made a cup of tea, and I had a box of cookies there for myself that I shared 2 cookies with him. And he said that he needed to see the operating room to see what was available in the city for their use. Only he didn't explain it that way. I said, okay, and I made him a cup of tea and 2 cookies. He ate 2 cookies before we started upstairs. And when we went upstairs, I didn't go to the operating room. I went to the ward that were filled with injured people due to the bombing. And I went to the room people first, because that's where the most serious students were. to go down to the ward where they were lined up 20 beds. We never got to the ward. I would take one room, next room, next room. The third room had a young child. I mean, he wasn't, he was a teenager. So that's young, to lose your life. And he was so damaged that he had bandages all over him. The only thing you could see were the eyes. And this soldier said, "Is this Fiji?" Fiji is the word for airplane. And I said, "Yes, yes, Fiji, 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 boom, boom, boom." And I could tell he was really, before he even spoke about asking any question, that this sick boy had really gotten to him. And I said, "It's all due to Fiji, to bombing." And he said, I have to go. He didn't ever get to the operating room. I was pleased with that.
Well, it sounds like you really reached him.
Yes, I did.
You really did.
Sure.
You really did. And it's a wonderful connection of human
But first of all, I saw him. I saw that he was a person, not a soldier with a gun. And I don't know why I was able to do that so well, that I touched his real person,
Yes.
that he was a fine person, even though he was wearing a uniform and carrying a gun. He was required to do that.
But reaching across boundaries like that in a time of war is so important and so special.
You have to know the person inside.
That's right. So I want to ask you just a little bit more, moving on. So you can see that Maude's time in Changsha was extremely tumultuous. We're back and forth. You evacuated Changsha at Christmas in 1971. You were 7 months pregnant during that evacuation. Then you came back in 1942, and you gave birth to Pamela, who is here with us now, in a partially destroyed hospital. At the end of the day, after working all day, and Winston delivered her. Tell us more about this birth. This is pretty impressive.
More about?
Tell us more about Anne's being born. How did that go for you?
Well, it was strange. I was being given special care. I had a room with a bed in it that was near the operating room, which is where a child would be born. It was I guess it was a little stressful. And I had to, they had the operating room fixed for me to come in for delivery. And I was in a private room. And I was taken from the private room to the operating room on the stretcher. And in the middle of the stretcher, I had delivery pain, what do you call them?
Labor pains.
Anyway, I stopped the boy that was pulling the stretcher, and he stopped in the middle of the hall, of the long hallway, opened up and everything. And I was having a
Labor pain.
labor pain. I turned over on the stretcher and bore my pain much easier than I would have been able to not to move.
Right.
Now, when you're on a stretcher moving, being transferred, you don't move, period. But that pain stopped. I turned over, had my pain, turned back, and went on. Then, in the delivery room, I was allowed to give myself chloroform when I needed it, you know. And I didn't need very much, of course. Until that finally got, I was taking it too often. And they were afraid I would take too much and damage myself. It was not be, chloroform isn't good for you. And so they took it away. And they handled it more properly, the way it should be given, just when it was absolutely needed. So I guess I gave them a good time, a hard time.
Well, it was basically you and Winston though, right?
Yes, sure.
You know, that was who was doing this delivery.
The thing was, I was an advantage. I was an American in a Chinese hospital in charge, and I was calling the shots. You don't do that in any hospital. But I managed to succeed.
Well, and here is the fruits of your labor.
And boy, am I being rewarded. I get breakfast in bed.
Well, the number of stories that you have to tell and the experiences that you have to share with us from China are really just phenomenal. And I want to encourage people to talk with you afterwards. But I want to finish, because we've been asked to finish the session with a very special story, which I know is a favorite of many people, and that's the story of the horse.
Oh, the surgery.
The surgery on the horse. So could we share that story?
Oh, certainly. It was a wonderful story.
A true story.
We had a Chinese, when they're
General.
Oh, a general.
general, that had been successfully operated on. But he had a horse, just a wonderful horse, that had a serious wound to damage his walking. He wasn't able to walk without a limp. And he thought that if he talked to my husband, maybe he could find out what the trouble was and take care. Well, it was very easy to find out the trouble. He had a bullet in his leg someplace, or I don't know what part of the, but it ruined his walking. And so, if you have a bullet in your leg, that's, to a doctor, that sounds, a surgeon, that sounds pretty easy. So we thought, well, we should really have an x-ray to find out where this bullet is. He was pretty sure it was a bullet. I think there was a torn entrance of the bullet. So we thought that we had an x-ray. So we tried to get him upstairs into the x-ray room. And that was difficult, beyond help, beyond success. And we never were success because he kicked the X-ray machine out of the way. He didn't like an idea. So we thought, now where are we going to operate on this horse and try to find the bullet and remove it? To the doctor, my husband, a surgeon, he didn't see that this was anything difficult, but the difficult was getting the horse on an operating room table. Well, you couldn't do that. I was smart enough to know you couldn't do that.
Just ask the nurse. No.
Well, the thing was that we decided to do it outside on the grass. In the just outside the hospital, there was a nice section of nice grass, and so they fixed us a strong bed for the horse and got the horse out there. And they had decided. I told you that we did an X-ray and it didn't succeed. So they had decided from the wound that is on the skin, maybe that it's such and such a place. And it was sheer luck that they found the right place. Anyway, we put straw on the grass and sheets on the straw. I don't know why we had to put sheets down for a horse to lie on, but I guess I felt that. I felt for the horse. And we did the surgery. It took a lot of anesthesia, but they used big cotton balls. And got him asleep and opened the wound and found the bullet, took it out. I think that you had to consider there was a certain amount of luck there because we didn't know where the bullet really was. And yet he went in and found it. But we'll give some of that credit to the surgeon because there was an outside wound and they know how to find things that a nurse can't see. Then, where am I?
Taking out the bullet.
We're in the yard.
Taking out the bullet.
Oh, the bullet's already out. It was a successful surgery quickly.
Right.
I mean, the horse stayed. Well, he did wiggle some, and we had to keep giving him more chloroform. And the horse was getting up. And I was scared to pieces. I was afraid he would still be limping. Of course he was, but just because he had just been operated on. The bullet was out, you could see it, and so it was gone. And we had to struggle to help the horse walk. But within a day and a half, he was able to stand on his foot, on his leg. And he had a successful recovery. The general was so pleased that he decided we could operate on him. If we saved his horse, maybe we could save him. He had a nice recovery.
The horse and the surgeon.
Oh, and so did the journal.
And the
The
general.
general.
And the general.
He fell in love with some of the nurses. Had to watch him.
So, Stories of Changsha. We are so fortunate to have you here with us. And just so grateful.
It has been a pleasure.
You know.
A real pleasure, really.
I hope,
I
I
was
hope
scared to
everyone
death
will
to
come.
tell. I didn't think I'd have anything to talk about. She asked the right questions.
We could go on and on and on, but I'm not going to ask you to do that now. But please come up, introduce yourself to Mrs. Pettus, and thank you so much, Maude. We're just really grateful.
And if I could just butt in from the Shameless Commerce Division.
Yes.
We do have Maude's niece Linda Bordner's book about Maude and Win, 10 Good Years, for sale just across the hall. And if you'd like to take a copy of the book home, you can talk to McGee and she can help you buy the book.
It's a great book.
I also have Mrs. Maude's signature.
Absolutely. We've got the pens right there, so Maude would be happy to sign it for you.
Oh,
But,
yes, indeed.
Yeah. So right across the hall and
Come back and I'll sign.
yeah, great, great.
It's a great book. It really is a wonderful
And Maude, just one more, couple more things here. First, we want to just give you a gift, and
Oh, my, a shawl.
it's nice
Oh.
silk.
Oh, that's perfect.
I'll let you get the display.
What does it say?
It's the most famous painting in Asian.
It's about Song Dynasty. iPhone and Song Dynasty. Yeah.
It's at Xiangya. So it's at the spring, not the spring festival, Pure Brightness Festival, June Sleeping Day, and everybody going.
Is that silk?
It's silk. Yeah. So that's just a little something to say. Thank you again.
We'd like a picture.
A picture.
With the